The year was 2008, and as an unknown politician was taking the world by storm with hope and change, a young 20-something Minda Honey was crossing over state lines to establish a new life with her high school sweetheart on the west coast of California, only to find the origin of her debut memoir, The Heartbreak Years. Minda Honey graces her presence in the City Beautiful for a live podcast recording at Zeppelin Books. Orlando was the second stop of her 9-city book tour, and we made sure to roll out the red carpet for Vulgar Geniuses first. We talked about everything from her past relationships and being vulnerable on the page while maintaining her gift of humor and wit. Stay with us for another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Zeppelin Books in downtown Orlando for the amazing Vulgar Geniuses in conversation with Minda Honey. Before we get started, a couple quick housekeeping things. We have books for sale in the back, beverages, adult and otherwise. And a quick plug for our upcoming event schedule, which is next week we have That Spell, which is a book launch with Autofocus, a local independent press here in the city of Orlando, by Tate Oquendo, featuring Tom Lucas and John King of another amazing Orlando podcast, The Drunk Odyssey. And then we'll be doing an event at the end of the month with Riot in Your Throat Press, featuring Courtney LeBlanc and Lori Udick. And now I'd like to turn it over to our amazing guests, the hostess with the mostest, the Vulgar Geniuses.
What's up, everybody? How y'all doing today?
Hello, welcome.
Hello. We are so excited to have you all here. This is a first for us. We've been doing a few live events over the last few months this year, but this is a very special one because we have our very first author who is in town in Orlando to come and talk about the book. We have none other than the Minda Honey, all the way from Louisville, Kentucky. We're so excited.
I'm so excited.
So we're just going to sit down for a chit-chat about her new memoir.
The Heartbreak Years.
Get down low. Hello. All right, so here is a little info before we start on Miss Minda Honey. Minda Honey's essays on politics and relationships have appeared in the Los Angeles Review of Books, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Oxford American, Teen Vogue, and Long Reads. Her work is featured in Burn It Down, Women Writing About Anger, A Measure of Belonging, Writers of Color on the New American South, and Sex and the Single Women. 24 writers reimagine Helen Gurley Brown's cult classic. She is the editor of Black Joy at Reckon. The newsletter has nearly 60,000 subscribers. She was the director of BFA and Creative Writing Program at Spalding University, a relationship advice columnist for Leo Weekly in Louisville, Kentucky, and founder of the Capsule Project Taunt, an alt-indie publication for Louisville that elevated the voices of the unaccounted during the height of the pandemic and ended in late 2021. Her debut memoir, The Heartbreak Years, from Little A, that just dropped this week, is a hilarious and intimate portrait of a Black woman finding who she is and who she wants to be, one bad date at a time. So we are your hosts. My name is Veronica.
And my name is Denny. Welcome to the podcast.
Now,
I'm
this
so
is not
excited to get to be y'all's first.
This is not the first time that we have had an opportunity to talk to Minda. This is the first time where it's in person. So we are very excited. But you already know how this goes. I'm going to pass it off to Denny. She's going to do a little hot seat moment for you.
Minda, what's good, girl?
Everything's good.
Everything's good. So,
I have no complaints.
the last time that we've talked, I don't think we've talked about the book. I think you've kind of just like passed, like you're like, oh, I'm trying to like figure out and do this, and like do a little collection of my own, and then we got really excited. But besides, the awesome book, what's keeping you busy?
Oh my gosh, Black Joy is keeping me busy. A full 40 hours is a lot of time. Like,
Yes.
because I was a freelance writer for a while, and just like doing content for startups and things like that. And then, the news was like, we're gonna have a recession. The venture capital banks were closing. Those startup dudes are not good with money. So I was like, I gotta go get a job. I need to go get a job. So I've been at Black Joy with Reckon News for about a year. Reckon used to be Reckon South, and so they used to be like a liberal news publication focused on the South, and then they've been doing a nationwide expansion. And as a part of that, they decided to take the Black Joy newsletter and hire an entire team of folks. So I came on as editor. We have social media, Black Joy Reckon, and then we've also just like grown the subscribers. We've like tripled them since I've started. So yeah, running Black Joy has been like taking a lot of time. Putting together a book tour is very, very time consuming. And then I also just decided in the midst of planning the book tour that I was also going to move out of my apartment. So, so I've been like setting little goals for myself. So before I came to Orlando, I was like, I need to have all of my books boxed because bed bugs are happening and I don't want them to infest my books when I come back from my trip. So the books have been boxed and relocated to the storage unit.
FYI, Minda has like 500 books. 100 has been donated, and then she has like 460 left, something like that.
Yeah. We did the math because a medium extra heavy-duty box from Home Depot apparently holds about 37 to 46 books, just depending on the book, And I had 9 of those boxes, and I had a stack of books that wasn't going to fit in a full box. And so we did the math, like 9 times 40. And then I also donated like 100 books to this place that does fundraising book sales. And so I was like, oh, dang, I didn't realize I had that many books. I guess all the piles of books just on my floor should have clued me in. But, I don't know, whatever. I'm a writer. Like, what am I supposed to do?
So the tea is true that you are going back to the Philippines this winter.
I am going to the Philippines this winter. I was born in the Philippines, and then we came to the States. Like, my dad was in the military, and that's where he met my mom when he was in the military in the Philippines. And then we came to the States, and then my sisters were born, and, a whole life happened. And my middle sister last year, after my grandmother on my dad's side passed away, she was like, we got to go to the Philippines. Like, we got to make this happen. We have family over there. Like, we've never met. Like, so she's really been, like, driving this. So anytime she complains about the cost of everything, I'm like, look, you're the one that made this happen. So you wrangled me into these expenses. So we're going. So, like, my sisters, my brother-in-law, my little niece, who's, like, 7, and my mom, we're all going. We're going for, like, 2 weeks.
Okay, so that officially makes you my cousin now.
Yes.
Okay, good to know. Good to know.
Yes, definitely cousins. Hey, cuzzo.
For those who don't know, she is actually our cousin. We've made that decision today. So before we...
I got promoted from love child to cousin.
Yes.
Well, it's Florida, so it can be both. So before we get down into the nitty-gritty of all things the Heartbreak Years, we want to hear you read from your book.
Thanks. So I'm going to read, I chose this section specifically for you all because it's for the book lovers in the crowd. And because we're celebrating Toni Morrison this month, and so I thought that this would be really appropriate. This is towards the middle of the book, and I'm kind of going on about how terrible online dating is, and, that's kind of I think that's all you need to know for this to make sense. So, when I first began online dating, the digital magic of the internet offered up an alternative to men at bars who placed unwanted hands on my hips and ass, attempting to get my attention and my number. Online, I had more than a face and a few slick lines to go off to decide whether we were a match. Now, dating apps have recreated the bar experience on our smartphones, But even before I could swipe through 100 profiles in less than an hour to confirm that every man in my vicinity was not the man for me, I'd begun to lose hope in the online dating process. None of the sites had led me to anyone substantial. Match.com was expensive and branded like business casual dating. eHarmony was a youth pastor convincing you Christ was cool on the low. I mainly used OkCupid with its cute, nerdy vibe. Back then, OkCupid liked to tell people how long you'd been on their site. It made me feel like guys would see that I'd been a member for years and treat me like a carton of eggs weeks past its sell-by date. Probably still good, but worth the risk. I've heard that every year removed a woman is from 22, the number of messages she receives drops drastically. Plenty of Fish was also free, so I used it too, even though its web design made it look like Craigslist's little cousin. And Plenty of Fish is where I met Keon. For our first date, Keon chose a high-end Mexican spot on the early wave of charging for chips and flights of salsa. It's the kind of place you'll find in any gentrified neighborhood, right next to the Pilates studio and just past the ukulele shop. Welcome to Silver Lake. I lived right around the corner. Keon stood outside the restaurant wearing the same black slim-cut Levi's and white thermal from his profile pic. He even had the same top 2 buttons undone. His baby fro tidy, his square-framed black glasses smudge-free. He watched as I strutted across Sunset Boulevard like a magnificent fucking unicorn. The My Little Pony of magnificent fucking unicorns. Glowing and glorious, strong and proud in my 8-inch wedges. Clop, clop. My hair rippled down my back in bourbon waves. Car headlights racing forward in the night served as my personal spotlight. I was first date ready. We did that whole awkward handshake, hug greeting, our arms and hands attempting to articulate, hi, hello, yes, I don't know you, but I want to know you, but I don't know you right now. We settled on a hug, and then the hostess led us to the patio where several other couples were already sharing dishes of sizzling fajitas, burritos coated in mole sauce, and corn drizzled with crema. I slipped into a chair beneath lanterns that crisscrossed high above our heads, their bellies glowing red, yellow, green, and blue. The table was so small, my wedges bumped up against his chucks. He told me he was a grad student, which meant free chips should have been a prerequisite for any restaurant he chose. When I went to visit you in Tallahassee, Natasha, we went to that Mexican restaurant and it had free chips. So my theory, has been proved out. I looked at the menu and then, out of concern for his budget, suggested, let's just split an app and some tacos. I'm not very hungry. He was quick to agree. Yeah, let's do that. But I'm going to need my own drink, I teased. I didn't feel shy at all when he looked at me. I held his gaze and he held mine, matching sets of brown eyes. He was from the East Coast, in LA, getting his PhD in African American literature, his focus, Baldwin. Over tacos, we talked books, our fingers pinched together around small corn tortillas. After a sip from his mezcal cocktail, he said, almost conspiratorially, I have the biggest crush on Toni Morrison. And my heart flickered. The list of men I dated who'd heard of Toni Morrison, much less had read any of her books, was tragically short. I thought dating this man might bring me back to the things I loved, like books and writing, possibly even motivate me about grad school. It can be easy to think you're falling in love with someone when really you're falling for the glimmers of your possible self you see in them. A unique kind of narcissism. Many years later, when I took on the title of professor myself, I was the one who was most surprised. And yet, somehow, I saw this man who was already progressing toward what I hadn't known I aspired to as my equal. And why wouldn't I? There's a greater cultural obligation for me, as a woman, to find a man with potential than to fulfill my own. Later that night, when I let him kiss me, Keon's fingers rested against my spine like I was the book he wanted to love next. Stop there.
If you want to know what happens to him, you're going to have to read the rest of that
And it's quite
story.
the tale.
So your memoir, it begins as if we have just stepped inside of a time machine and transported back to 2008. And it mentions of a past that felt so hopeful. And then suddenly we see there's this shift for you. This was a major year of a start of transformations that would begin with a first major heartbreak between you and your high school sweetheart, Tyler. When we often think about the first heartbreak one has with someone from high school, it's often seen as like a throwaway relationship, like the starter kit to becoming an adult that you don't need to take seriously. But you write in these essays that it is important to acknowledge that first love because it is the beginning of how young people form their minds around what love should look like. Will you talk to us about this idea that young love holds a place for our maturation and understanding of relationship?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we don't take young love seriously because it's so dramatic and it's so overblown because we haven't had our hearts broken yet. So we're just like in it. We're just fully falling in it with no safety net. But, you know, like, I think we have to take every era of our life seriously. Like, those feelings were genuinely big at that time because that's how we felt things. And I think that we don't have to be dismissive of those moments just because we grew up in the ways that we thought about love or think about love shifted or changed. And in my situation, you know, me and my high school sweetheart were together for 6.5 years. We lived in 3 different states together. We shared multiple apartments. We had bank account that we shared, you know, like we were in it. And I think that no matter what age you are, because now I'm 38, so I have friends who are going through divorces, like it's never easy to dismantle a life that's been built together, whether that happens at 23 or it happens in your 30s or it happens in your 60s. So I don't know, I feel like we just gotta have compassion for ourselves and for everyone kind of experiencing that for the first time.
Where were you when you decided, okay, I wanna write this book and I wanna talk about Tyler? Like, what were the emotions and the things that you were feeling when you sat down to write the first essay that was going to be in this collection?
Well, some of this book was written in real time because I joined Meetup.com was really popular back in the day, and so I was like, Orange County Writers, and like this meetup group came up, and it was all like older white people. They had to all be like 20 to 40 years older than me, and then there's me showing up like, oh, me and my boyfriend just broke up and I want to kill myself, like and you know, like Mr. Shoemaker's writing about the Socratic method or whatever, like and they would be so like not interested, so frustrated. I would just keep coming back every single week. I'm pretty sure that writing group fell apart because of me. Like, she will not take a hint. I don't know why she's so consistent with it. Like, so, you know, so some of those pieces were very dramatic, very over the top. And then you come back to them a little bit older, a little later in life when you have more perspective and you can revise things. I think back then in that era, it was also, I don't know how many of you were old enough to have full-time jobs in 2008, but if you had an office job, you would all day just be like writing your friends' emails. So, and now I couldn't even imagine sending one personal email at work, much less like just stories. Like, I still have my Yahoo email address, Minda_R@Yahoo, because it's an archive of that time. Like, and it wasn't like, oh, I would just like send one email off to Eva. Like, no, I was sending like 4 or 5 of these lengthy emails to friends. And so some of the stuff, like as I was like researching the book, some of the stuff like going back and rereading those emails that I'd sent. So some of these things have been written in real time. Some of them I wrote when I was taking writing workshops in Denver at the Lighthouse. Some of them came into fruition during grad school. And then just a couple were essays that I wrote from scratch as I was like finishing the book.
So Minda, one of the best things about your writing, I think this is one of my favorite things about your writing, is that you make readers aware of the political climate in the country while you write about everything that's funny and hilarious. You discuss racism, classism, patriarchy, among plethora of things. So it sets up your essays and makes readers' things a little bit harder and not just, you know, Minda talks about sex.
Baby.
Yes, and you know, and I'm talking to Joyce, the Amazon reviewer, 2 weeks ago. Okay, Joyce?
Well, we got a new one on Goodreads also named Veronica, who said that I did not integrate it
That was
well.
not me.
I can confirm 10,000%. But how are you able to execute this, this writing so effortlessly while maintaining your wit and humor on the page? Because it's a lot of things that you kind of have to like, squeeze in. Like these are deep things that you talk about, but you ever so slightly like present it to readers.
Yeah, I mean, it probably looks effortless by the time
it feels
by
effortless
the time y'all read it, but like that's just like a lot of revision work. And I tell my writing students like not everything happens in a first draft. Like different things happen during different revisions. And when we were in grad school, Natasha and I were in grad school at the same time. Layla Lalami, taught us like you need to anchor whatever you're writing within whatever specific time period it's occurring in. Like that's just one more way to like ground that world. And then once you start doing that, it's like, okay, like if this era of my life had taken place under the Trump presidency, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I've been able to just be like dumb, young, and drunk on the dance floor. But actually I would have, because we saw that the pandemic did not slow those young people down. I was like, I can't even join in on like criticizing people still clubbing at the height of this pandemic, because if I was like 22, I would be doing the same silly thing. So is what it is. You got to be young and dumb at some point. And I was during the Obama years. And so that meant something, because Steubenville had happened. So we were talking about Me Too. We're thinking differently about race. And so some of that stuff I kind of like was like, oh, well then how did that impact me in my dating decisions? And then as I was like, coming through doing the like kind of final rounds of revisions on this book, I also started to think about like the gap between what was changing then and what is happening now. So, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, where Breonna Taylor was murdered by the police. And I had some questions about like why I didn't write about her more. It's like, because I'm still a Black woman living in Louisville, Kentucky. Like this is still a thing that's like unfolding and happening. But as I was living through that, it did make me think more about why did Trayvon Martin's murder feel like this end of the Obama era? It wasn't the end of his presidency, but it was the end of that hopeful feeling that we felt. And so what does that mean? And like teasing that out and thinking about it a little bit more. But yeah, I think locating your work in space and time really adds this additional layer of richness for both you and the reader.
Yeah, and I think that's what... Yes. Yeah, because that's what like I think I appreciate about your writing. It's like, I can be in that space with you, and we might not completely share everything together, like, as a lived experience, but it makes me realize like things that I did not think about, or, like, because I'm a female. I was just thinking of like the wholeness of it all, but there's other things.
The wholeness or the wholeness?
Both, girl. So
don't get me wrong. I was not thinking about like Obama when I was like dancing to Lady Gaga.
Exactly.
Like, I wasn't,
we're trying to find a bathroom in the club.
Yeah,
no.
this was reflection, revision.
So, memoirs. Memoirs, when you first think of a memoir, you're like, oh, this is this person's life story. But then you realize, like, oh, there's other people that are involved in the story. And it is very open about your relationships and sexual history. What were the conversations like with those mentioned within the book that had to be had prior to the book being written or when it was published? And most importantly, what were the conversation that you had with yourself before, during, and after the publishing of this book?
Yeah, so, I mean... Before I even, as I was like kind of like working on early drafts of this book, I did have a call with my high school sweetheart. Like we were just like catching up on the phone. I kind of talked about how I was like working on this book. He's like, "Oh, write whatever you want about me," and I was like, "Well, I wasn't asking for permission, but like, thank you." So like he's like, I'm just so happy for you. Like I'm so happy you're like a writer. Like he's like. People, anyone who's like read the book or read anything I've written about him, people are always very like, you're too easy on him. I was like, y'all, like he was just genuinely a nice person and continues to be a very nice guy, but was also just like young and ill-equipped for like the situation we found ourselves in. So that's why I felt like, oh, I should be balanced and honest about that. Chevy, so I had an essay go viral a few years ago called A Farewell to Fuck Boys, where Chevy was like, that was the first time he appeared in my writing, and we were not on speaking terms at the time. And then when the pandemic hit, we reconnected and we're kind of like chatting a little bit online, and he's like, I read that essay like 20 times. I was like, what? Yeah, he's like, I love it. Like, you're such a good writer. And like, I just have this better understanding of you and your thought process. So it's like, okay, cool. And then some of the guys, like, you know, I'm not currently in conversation with, I don't know them. And like, we changed details. I was vague in certain places. And I also just want to remind people that by the time something becomes a book, like, these are characters, you know, this is art. And these are people that I knew who they were 15 years ago, but that version of them does not exist today. Like, some of these dudes are probably like picking their kids up from kindergarten. Like, they're like, you know, and I only ever knew this small sliver of them. Like, the story that some of these people would tell about me would probably be unrecognizable to me because they only saw this kind of like sliver of who I was. So really what these men are in this book are like a screen for me to like project onto my emotional immaturity and the things that like I was struggling with in that era, versus them being like, you know, solid, accurate representations of who they are as people. Henry still calls me every year on my birthday. I'm sure he's got 20 copies of this book, like, you know, acted a little disappointed I was changing his name. I was like, do you know what you do for a living? Like, I'm changing your name. But, you know, he likes the shine. So, yeah, you know, it is what it is.
You know, one of the things, especially when you were talking about Tyler, you know, you were talking about the whole situation, how messy it was, is that you also take the time to claim your responsibility in it. And I think, you know, sometimes people can really forget when they're relaying the story about, this is the person that did me dirty.
Yeah.
And you're like, but what did you do? What was it for you? Because I guess that's a state of being in a revision for you, of addressing, like, this is the part that I played in it.
Yeah, well, I think when we find ourselves really upset about a breakup, or just like we have this fury that we can't move past because we think like this person has betrayed us in this major way, and that perhaps they have, but what we're actually, I'm gonna speak for all of us because I know in the depths of my soul this is true. What we're really upset about is the self-betrayal, you know? Yeah. And then once you realize that you sold yourself out because you decided to have perfect attendance for the fuckery, all of a sudden you're able to like release some of that anger, right? Because now you're directing it towards the right person, and you just have to reconsider, because yeah, some of these people were not, at that moment in their life, were not in the right place to be like dating me. I was in the right place to date them, but I just kept showing up. Like, I kept drunk dialing. I was there. I was in it. And for whatever, and you know, and I'm not gonna like, I show a lot of grace and tenderness to my younger self because there's a lot of reasons why we continue to show up in not so great situations. Like, there's a lot of different variables to that. But yeah, I think that initially when a breakup happens, you're just like, oh, this person's the worst. And then a little time passes and you're like, oh, you know, maybe I was part of the problem as the other half of the relationship. And then a little bit more time passes and you're like, there are no villains here. We're all just human. Like, you know? So it's just maturity. It's just that emotional growth.
Mm. So Minda, as a child of immigrant parents, there's always this pressure of not to fuck up. And, you know, we have to get our shit together, right? And, you know, as a black woman in America, it almost feels like everything is set up against you. Well, in this book, you have presented the reality to your readers in the most humane way possible. Even though other people might claim that it's like a niche experience, it's a reality that needs to be talked about and recognized. How was it like to finally write those experiences in the page while allowing yourself not to be burdened by the trauma that it has caused you in your aughts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that thread of like the things I experienced in the workplace and how like workplace racism impacted my career, because, you know, like I graduated college in 2007, so we're in the Great Recession. It wasn't like jobs were easy to come by, and the job that I had gotten was like a leadership development role. it was a sort of position where they only recruit from the top 3 universities in communications in the nation. And I was able to interview for it because I had done so well at my internship and was the only Black woman who made the program. My co-intern also made it, but couldn't afford to go because the salary was so low and they were going to put her in Connecticut, and everybody else's parents were like helping them. Her parents couldn't afford to help her. I was in Cincinnati, so I was like, $40,000, I get a 2-bedroom apartment. Like, I was living large. I was supporting my dancer boyfriend while he taught ballroom dance classes and made no money. But that was not to be for her in Connecticut. So to then go into this workplace and have this manager who treated me like I was incompetent, when it was not only am I more competent than everyone else who's in this position because I did it without the resources, without the education that they received, and I it was a sort of experience where they tell you just a couple of days beforehand that you got an interview. They fly you in the day of for a full day of interviews, fly you back home. Even lunch is an interview. They had us write press releases on the spot. The girl sitting next to me was like, "How do you adjust the margins?" I was like, I don't know. like somebody at lunch got mustard on her shirt. It was intense. So the fact that I out-interviewed all of those people only to then be met with workplace racism, that was something that really impacted me in a lot of ways, because I constantly felt like I had to prove myself to overcome what had happened. And so as I was going through the final revisions of the book, I noticed this thread and how it had shaped me. And I was like, oh, I need to put this in here too. And I've talked about how at 30, I walked away from this sales career I had to go get my MFA in creative writing. But it was also I finally had gotten to a point financially where I could afford to take that risk into the arts. I had a bonus check big enough to live off of for a year because I was the top salesperson. And up until that point, my ex, he was trying to make it as a dancer, living with 6 roommates, but he also had grandparents who had a very nice house in Orange County. So he had the sort of security blanket that I did not have. So I think that's why it was important for me to put that in there. And I think that a lot of folks are going through these workplace frustrations. And even when you know that it's not you, it's racism and it's systemic, it can still feel because there is this expectation that we're just going to overcome it all the time, that you're doing something wrong and you're not doing enough. So I just wanted to put that out there for folks. Did I answer that question?
Yes.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yes, that was so good. So one of the essays that I relished in the book was...
Relished, such a good word.
When you talked about colorism, the LA face, Oakland booty. So, the honesty of claiming that you also have your own privileges, but maintaining the gentleness and the respect for the other Black women in the community was phenomenal. How do you want readers to understand, that even in the community, Black women in America has its own layer and its own microaggressions?
Yeah, that was the hardest chapter to write.
For real?
Yeah.
That was so good. I love it so much.
That was the hardest chapter to write because I was the stakes feel high. I need to get this right. People don't talk about colorism enough, and because there aren't enough conversations, there's just not enough language, there's not enough territory that's been covered. So every time you talk about it, you're just wading out there by yourself. But I felt like it was important because I can't be a Black woman writing about dating and not addressing colorism, not addressing what it is to be a mixed Black woman, a biracial Black woman, a multiracial Black woman dating, and how those experiences differed from some of my friends who were also dating around the same time too. But then to bring in this other aspect of it, because when we think about people being biracial, a lot of times people default to Black and white. And so it's that's not my experience. I got a Black daddy and a Filipino mommy who also got a Black daddy. So, and that can be a lot to unpack. And I think a lot of people just aren't bringing that level of nuance to casual everyday conversations. They're definitely not bringing it to their Twitter, tweets. So I was but this book is an opportunity for me, uninterrupted for 5,000 words, to kind of lay it all out. So it's I want to talk about the privilege that I have when it comes to skin color, textures, and features, but I also want to talk about what like where that locates me with like within the Filipino community too. So yeah, it was a difficult chapter to write, and I was like, and that's what I thought the backlash was going to be about. But it turns out people are just upset I slept with so many guys.
How dare you?
I didn't think it was that many at the time, but you know, who's counting?
Nobody, and people got to live their lives, man. But no, to me, like you said, like it's a conversation that needs to be talked about, and especially like, you know, when you're like, you know, I'm light skinned for like Black women, but I'm like dark skinned for like Filipino people. Like, where do I stand? Yeah. And like as a young person going, you know, in the world and trying to find out like everything about you, that's something that, you know, people still struggle.
Yeah.
Up to this
and
day
people,
for
when
them.
they see your face, like they assume, oh, they know certain things about you, and they make these assumptions, and it's like, oh no, you actually don't even know the half of it.
Right.
You're making, I don't know. And I think colorism within the Filipino community is really interesting to me, because I feel like there is so much overlap between Filipinos and the Black community.
Yes,
like, you
it's a
know,
lot.
it's like, okay, so where's this colorism coming from? Like,
From
you know?
whiteness.
Yeah, it's
From
white. It's
colonialism.
whiteness.
So
yeah,
you know.
and that's what I tell people too, because now the big thing is like, if you don't have 4 Black grandparents, you're not Black. And it's like, look, you're not gonna deny me my Blackness because of U.S. imperialism, okay? Like, because my mom's father, it was also in the military, also Black, but he left the family in the Philippines, and so my mom and her family were there for my dad to then come a generation later, meet her, marry her, and bring her to the States, you know? And even within her own family, my mom is very light-skinned. When we go to, like, different Filipino stores, like, when she came out to visit me to L.A., like, she started speaking Tagalog to somebody, and they jumped because they thought she was Puerto Rican, like, you know? She's very light-skinned, and her siblings, her sisters are darker skinned. They have hair texture more like mine. And she said when she was growing up, her mom would tell her, like, she couldn't go to certain birthday parties because her siblings weren't allowed to go because of their skin color. And she would be like, but why can't I go? And her mom's like, look. And she's like, and I didn't understand it until I had Black children. Like, you know, so my mom then comes to the U.S. and is like trying to raise 3 Black children and trying to raise them also within like an immigrant Filipino community in Kentucky. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many just like layers to all of this.
I want to touch back on something that you mentioned in the beginning. You were talking about Obama. So, 2008.
Y'all remember how you felt in 2008, right? You had the sticker, you had the T-shirt.
Had all of that. 2008, great year for Obama, trash year for Minda, is the opening line to your memoir. Knowing that majority of your memoir deals with your personal relationships with men and the growing pains that accompany them, talk to us about including the Obama presidency within the narrative of your story and what you wanted to express about being a Black woman dating in America and protection and safety in regards to his presidency.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let y'all in on a little secret. It is really, really hard to write a memoir about dating and not write about your father. So, Obama and the patriarchy, TM, then become a nice placeholder. So any place where a reader would otherwise sense, something is missing here, she's writing around something, we just plugged in Obama and what was happening politically. And no one has been the wiser. Like, you know how many of these interviews I've done and nobody's been like, how did you write 300 pages about dating and we don't know anything about your relationship with your father? Like, I pulled it off, y'all. Take that, Joyce. For the second half of that question, though, as far as like how the Obama presidency affected my dating, you know, Obama and Michelle became role models for like this, you know, you want this like beautiful Black love, like, you know, in the book I call it like a snow globe, like this Black American life. Like Obama and Michelle made that feel attainable in ways in which it was not attainable for many of us. And then also just, you know, we had this hopefulness around us about what an Obama presidency was going to mean, and the culture was shifting a lot slower than the news narratives that were coming out about us being in a post-racial America. So living in that space between the reality that you want and the reality that you have, and every day is a choice. Like, am I going to live in the reality that I want and hopefully push our culture further towards that reality, or am I going to have to concede and live in the reality that we currently have out of, caution for my safety?
Your excerpt that you read, I think, fits this next question. The face of dating has changed in so many ways. I remember there was a time where the classifieds in the back of the newspaper was a ways to find new love. Long before the invention of AOL chat rooms and dating apps like Tinder, I feel that what women never knew until once they found themselves in the thick of it was the layers of alertness we have to have when navigating those swipes to the right. The 2016 and 2020 elections made it extremely clear to women of color, especially black women, that wolves are dressed in sheep clothing, holding up a fish for the perfect shot. Even as you step into this new state of awareness of what it was that you wanted in a relationship with a person, how did those historical milestones change your approach to dating in 2023?
Oh man, and I think I talk about this a little bit in the book, how I kind of went back and forth about whether or not I would be dating white men. My high school sweetheart was white. We dated for 6.5 years. I went to all of his family functions. His sister at the time was also dating a black guy, so we would just be exchanging looks, at Thanksgiving, sitting right next to each other. But he was also just one of those white dudes that you would just take anywhere, and he was just very comfortable everywhere, but also very much himself. So he wasn't putting on a black scent or doing any of that nonsense. And so when you have that sort of first white boyfriend experience, you're like, oh, white dudes are fine. And then no. Then you go out into the world and they're, saying, I've had friends who told me that, she told me a guy that she went out with asked her if she was the same color all over.
Oh.
In the book, I talk about a white guy that I went out with who we just kept running into each other at the club. And so finally he asked me out, and we're having this dinner, we're having martinis, we're having a good time. He's like, wow, you're just so different than what I thought you were going to be. I was like, well, what did you think I was going to be? He's like, I just thought you were going to be this freaky deaky black chick down to fuck. And I was like, I'm going to be down to have 3 more of these drinks on your tab and then go home alone. How about that? I was out on a date once with a guy who told me that when he runs marathons, his favorite part is outrunning black men because genetically he shouldn't be able to because they have longer tendons in their legs. I was like,
Problematic.
Yeah, so you have a few of those experiences. You do a stint in Denver.
Which you call the White Atlanta.
White Atlanta, which is so funny because I ran into one of my sister's coworkers, and he was living in Denver, and I was like, oh my gosh, I call it the white people. He's like, oh my God. He pulled up his Instagram, and that was his Instagram bio. He's like, I live in white people's Atlanta. So every black person who lives in Denver knows the vibes. So when I went back to California, I was like, ooh, I'm going to avail myself of all this racial, diversity, I'm not dating any more white dudes. And then I moved back to Kentucky, and I was like, well, we got to mix up. So I'm always going back and forth on it. But, yeah, politics makes it hard. People just, I feel like if you want to date black women, the black woman you're pursuing cannot be your first black friend ever. You need to baby step. Your social circle should feature people of color before you date a person of color. Because if you have an event at your home, I don't want to show up and be like, oh, just me, huh? Yes. There are just things I think you should prepare to prepare your life to welcome a person of color into it. Maybe that should be an essay.
Yes. I used to do this thing where I would go and find them on Facebook and then go through their list of friends.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't see nobody that look like me. This cannot happen. Close
I dated this one dude, and I said he kept making book recommendations to me, and finally I had to be like, I don't know if you know this, but every time you recommend a book to me, it's a white man, and I'm a black woman writer, so he almost fell off his bar stool. So, like, yeah. But you also don't want the opposite. You don't want to go through and it's like all of their exes are black women that look just like you. You're like, what? Yeah.
Red
Yes.
flags.
Yeah.
Red
All
flags.
over, all over. Flag on play.
So, exploration of sexual desire, especially for women, has always been taboo.
Yeah.
You know, you have opened this query in my head where you said, "I wondered why there were no overtly sexual places for straight women, calibrated for our comfort." So, I've kind of dreamt of a place since where we don't have to perform or inconvenience ourselves for validation and love. This leads me to like my question about consent and autonomy of the female body. How important was it to show readers, specifically, black women that are dating, that there is no way of navigating this space or sexual partners and or randos while cis is just trying to live?
Yeah.
And is there really a safe space, Minda?
I want to hear about your safe space fantasy.
I don't know, just like big couches and unlimited drinks.
Right.
Like it could be like, and whatever you want to wear. I think I just really want to go to a place like where I can wear whatever the fuck I want and I'll be fine. Like nobody's gonna touch me. Nobody's gonna look at me differently. Like if I walk there barefoot or sans this or that, nothing, I'll be all right.
You know what's so funny is that Erin Keene at Salon, when she interviewed me, she asked me, she's like, what would this place look like? And I said the same thing. I was like, plush couches,
Unlimited drinks,
unlimited drinks.
and
I can
food.
wear whatever I want. I was like, it's basically the place we pretend that we're at without like the false sense of
Yes.
security. And she's like, it's so funny because I was like, well, what would your place be? She's like, basically the same. And she's like, it's so funny that like what we're asking for isn't even that outlandish, and yet it does not exist for us. And I thought it was important to tell women, like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I did a different podcast interview, and the woman who was interviewing me was like, but where does personal accountability come in? And I was like, you know what? You are never going to hear me speak out against like young women in their 20s that find themselves in challenging positions because we as a society have done nothing to prepare or protect them. We have not given them the resources. And so they are not to blame for the the tragedy that befalls them.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a former coworker in regards to an incident that happened in Orlando with a woman who was raped out in the Disney area. And he was like, but why did she wear that outfit? That was the longest conversation that I ever had with someone in regards to why we should not be assaulted because of what we have on. Like, that doesn't give anyone permission. And it boggles my mind that people are still in that
And a number of people can say, I was wearing slacks. I was sober. Like, none of those things mattered. All that mattered was that I was in the presence of a rapist.
Right.
That was the only consistent variable.
So your memoir focused mainly on the men in your life that you were in relationship with, but you also touch on some sensitive moments, moments where your body was not in a space of protection, but one where the men placed you in harm's way. Writing about traumatic experiences can be a difficult decision to make when you know that all of your business will be out for the entire world to read. Why did you choose to share those moments with us, the readers?
I think any time that I've published something that was like hard to write about or I felt uncertain about putting out in the world, I get a lot of like weird comments about my writing and like lengthy emails from white men living in Tokyo now, like whatever. But I also get messages from people like thanking me and saying like, you put words to something that I wasn't able to articulate, or I've been in this experience and I didn't realize this was something else that other people go through or think about. And so for me, like needing to tell those stories, needing people to know they're not alone, like outweigh the discomfort. And also the things that might feel more vulnerable were maybe not as vulnerable for me by the time I started writing the piece. And I've also just kind of like published so many different types of essays that I've like built up this kind of like information about me that already exists publicly and seen how little impact it has on like my actual day-to-day life. Whereas the things that felt really vulnerable to me to write about was like writing about colorism, writing about, you know, my friend having cancer and me feeling a little jealous because she has this husband who's like taking care of her. And I was like, what if I get cancer? Who's going to take care of me? Like, that's hard to like admit, like, and to write about. But again, I was like, I can't be the only woman, single woman, you know, of a certain age who's like felt this way or had these concerns. I think it will really mean something to just put it out there.
So Minda told us that we don't have to be perfect and we're not alone in these experiences. Being so open with these experiences allowed us to square with what happened to us in our experience in our past lives. That there's nothing to be ashamed of, only learnings. How was writing this book allowed you to heal and blossom into the next stage of womanhood?
It's really interesting because it really did feel like just like shutting the chapter on this part of my life because, you know, I'm going to be 40 in a couple of years, but because I've been writing this book about my 20s, I've been like mentally living in my 20s for a long time, and also just dealing with like the ripple effect of things that happened to me in my teens and my 20s. And so now like all of that is like here, it's been thought as much as it could possibly be thought, and it's been like processed and it's been turned into art, and now like it's a book that exists out in the world, and it does feel freeing. And also for so long, because I've been working on this book, my narrative about myself is about like the men who have hurt me and who have like broken my heart. And now that doesn't need to be my narrative any longer, you know? So I actually was thinking about this not that long ago. I was like making a little list of like, what will my new narrative about myself be? And I'm not going to tell y'all now. I'm going to make you wait 10 years until I put that book out about my 30s. You'd be like, oh, that's where she was. Like, but it's time for a new narrative.
When I was a teenager, I remember there being a group of single women at church that I never wanted to be like. I would watch them in their single women's group, thinking that the only person they would ever be married to was Jesus. And how I never aspired to have that life. But in your epilogue, you reflect on what relationships can be and the power of finding the life you desire to live outside of the societal norms that we see on the daily. At the space that you find yourself living in now, what is the most surprising when you think about what your ideas and the ideas that you let go, that you thought you needed in order to hold on to firmly to find the life that you wanted?
Yeah, so in my 20s, I think, you know, it was really easy to just like abandon myself, abandon my life, to like try to be with someone, to do something, to like, you know, just like to jump into this other thing. But now I've built this life that like I really love, and it's like very precious to me. So I'm just a lot less reluctant to like give it up for anyone, and also to invite anyone in that's not going to add to the life. I think I say in the book, like, if a man is like the worst part of your life, that's an easy problem to fix because you just dump him. like you just cut him right out. But you know, but so now the stakes are a lot higher to like invite the wrong person in, because they could potentially really disrupt something that I like have so much value for. Whereas in your 20s, so much of your life is like chaos, that when somebody else is like a chaos demon in your life, you don't even realize it. It's just like a part of it's the wallpaper, it's a part of the background. But as like, you know, your finances stabilize, your workplace stabilizes, your relationships with your family stabilizes, your friends, when you bring someone in that brings chaos into your life, it's very hard to ignore what is happening. So, you know, so now I'm just kind of at this point where it's like, for me to have a partner, this is going to be someone that's like really, you know, we want the same things out of life. The person's got to be joyful. They've got to be, I feel like a lot of times I meet men who I call it the Drake complex, because it's not like Drake could have any number of women, right? Any number of women would just like leave their life to go be with Drake happily, right? But he doesn't want that. He wants Rihanna. He low-key wants Beyonce. He wants somebody that has to walk away from what means the most to them to be with him, right? And so there are these men that I feel like see you out here shining, see you out here being joyful, living your life so happy, and they want that. They want you, but only long enough for you to attract them. And then they just want to like dim your shine, put you in a little box, have you sitting at home waiting on them. And it's like, why? Like, if what you want's a housewife, like, especially with this new movement of like women wanting the housewife life, like you can go out and find that woman, but that's not good enough. So I have to be really careful about that, about accidentally dating men who turns out like they actually like hate me because like I'm out here thriving and they don't actually like that. Like it was appealing at first, but then when it's like, oh no, this is like your actual life and you're not just gonna like seamlessly fold into my life. It's kind of like they want to put you in like one of those dioramas, like a diorama dollhouse, and it's like, I'm not gonna fit, I'm too big, I'm 3D. So the stakes are just higher, and I have to be more selective, and I have to find someone who values and respects me and what I'm doing with my life enough to support that and to appreciate it.
Yeah, so if y'all out here and y'all see those dudes, it's like, I need somebody to be my piece. They trying to steal it. They trying to steal it. Don't go for it. They trying to steal it.
Yes.
Did moving back to Louisville help kind of facilitate that kind of like freedom, ... kind of question mark, like you said in your last?
So I have an essay coming out next month with Harper's Bazaar about like my relationship with my sisters and how like moving back because I'm the oldest daughter. And
me too.
Right, the oldest daughter, my middle sister's 3 years younger than me, my youngest sister's 6 years younger than me, and my parents divorced when I was 12. So I was like, like a substitute authority figure in a lot of ways. And so it wasn't until I moved back to Louisville in my 30s that we got to know each other as like adults and become like actual friends, but we had to break out of those predetermined family roles in order to do it, and that's not easy work. And when I first moved back and I was having all this like family conflict, I was complaining to my brother-in-law about it. He's like, oh yeah, everybody moves home to have less drama with their family. So it's like, okay, Jeremy. You're right. So in a lot of ways, like moving home forced me to like confront a lot of things because like in LA, it's such a big city that if something goes wrong with someone, you're never going to see that person again. They cease to exist. In Louisville, you're going to be at the grocery store with them. They're going to be at every networking event. Every ex is going to be dropping your name behind your back. One of my exes told me he got the audiobook. I was like, have at it. 8 hours of me talking about other men. Enjoy. Thanks for your purchase. But you're going to constantly still be in community with them. So you have to learn how to navigate that, how to deal with that. And I do think that becomes freeing in a way because all of a sudden you realize like you gotta know how to let things go. Right. You gotta know how to like end things before they get to this chaos level. Like you need to just be like, let's cut this off now before we really deeply hate each other. Like there's all these skills. Like I had to learn how not to let the way that somebody has treated me as if like this is something to do with like it's a very ego-driven place to be like, oh, this is a reflection of who I am. It's like, no, this is a reflection of who they are and where they're at in their life. Like you have to be able to make peace with all those things and find some distance. And so in that way, moving home gave me like this emotional freedom because I was able to like learn how to live with some degree of emotional distance.
Is Philly ready for Minda?
I don't know. Yeah, so I'm in the process of packing up my place. I'm going to travel through the winter. I'm manifesting for myself that I don't do winter anymore. I'm moving out of my place. I'm just going to travel to all warm places, and then I want to pop up in Philly in March because I also think when you move someplace in the wintertime, it's hard. You don't get to meet people. You're not out looking cute in your sundress. But yeah, I need just a little bit of a Louisville break. I needed an adventure. I need a new adventure. I have a coworker who's also getting ready to move to Philly in the spring, and I had asked them about it, and they were like, yeah, I've been in the city that I'm in since I graduated college, and I feel like I've done all the things that I came to do here and that I can do here. And I was like, yeah, I checked a lot of boxes here in Louisville, and now what's next? Also, I need a bigger dating pool.
Yes.
When you move home in your 30s, Like, don't be sad about anybody you didn't get to date in high school, because when you move in your 30s, all those people are still down. They're still down. And if they're married, so they're not down, your odds are they're about to get divorced and be back on the market again. So you can go ahead and cross off that bucket list very quickly. But then what happens? Then what? Who's left? So it's time. It's time for a little bit of a larger city. I love a Philly man. Them and their brogans and their beards.
So normally, at this part of the conversation, we would normally ask you, what is your top 5? We've done that already. Go back, listen to that podcast. You can find out the answer. So this is when we will open it up. If anyone has a question for Minda about her book, about her life, about what's next, 'tis the time. Anyone?
About the specific
Don't be shy.
beauty of Philly men.
No questions? Everybody?
Okay, Cherie.
So, in the process of writing the book, is there anything that surprised you about yourself? Both like as a human, as yourself, but then also as an artist?
Yeah, I think with a book for a long time, it feels like just a stack of paper and like a mess, and you're just like, when is this ever going to come together? And then one day, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, wait, this is a book. Like, this is a book. Like, this is a book. So that's a really surprising moment when like that switch happens. I think, like your life doesn't stop when you decide to write a book. So all the things that are like happening in the background that I still manage to like write through, I'm really proud of that. As far as like being an artist, I went to Story Knife last July, and it's an incredible residency in Homer, Alaska for women writers. Like each writer gets their own cabin, and then there's a communal house, and they like make all your meals for you. And Alaska in July has 18 hours of sunlight, so like it's the land of the midnight sun. So you're just like in this beautiful place with these other writers, and I was able to complete an entire revision of the entire book. And so just being able to have access to community like that, those spaces, other writers to like talk you through the things that are happening. I think as a person, what did I learn that surprised me writing this book? I don't know. I think it just changes from revision to revision. What you were like, okay, I'm comfortable saying this. And it's like, oh, no, actually I'm not. Oh, maybe I'll put it back in. Like that kind of changes. I think also like the person I was during this era of my life, like I'm no longer that person, but I'm also like no longer the person that wrote these things either now. Like you can just like see all of like the ways like you're moving forward, even as like this becomes a document and like an archive in a certain way. And I always tell people that I'm not a person and that's like at all concerned about legacy. Like I don't want to have any kids. I don't need to have a building named after me. But I wrote a book though. I wrote a memoir. It's gonna be on a shelf forever, I hope. But yeah, so in a way that like that's a legacy too. So I think that's where I'm at now, is like rethinking what legacy is, what it means to put something to paper and to like commit like that version of yourself to paper, like to say like this is important enough to have the weight of words to it. I don't know, and that's probably like meta writer shit, but that's what's on my mind these days.
Any other questions?
No, I mean, most of books like mine end with like the person finding the love of their life. And so part of me was just like, let me just write this book so I can meet this man before it ends. And that didn't happen. So then I got to the end and was like, oh, well, we couldn't just leave it in Denver. Couldn't do that to you all. I mean, pot farmers are a high note to end on. But no, I was like... So yeah. So I really had to just kind of like sit down and think about like, where does this book end? And like, what is my life? What does it look like? And it's like, I feel like there's not enough space for people who are chronically single to like talk about that without sounding bitter or without having someone be like, oh, you'll find it when you stop looking. It's like, no, like, you know, and I think if you don't get a job that you applied for and it was your dream job, people can understand and be sympathetic, even if the job you currently have is pretty great. So it's like, why can't we talk about relationships and be like, hey, today it's really hard being single, but overall, I have this really great life. So with that epilogue, I call it the epilogue, I really wanted to create space to talk about the things that really irk me as a single woman, like the fact that my credit card company 15 times a year is like, get a second card, double your points. It's like, you know I'm single. Like, you know, it's just me. It's just me. I've been a member since 2005, American Express. Nothing has changed. Why are you doing this? So just things like that. So I kind of talk about that. I talk about the way people in relationships treat single people. But then I also talk about how much of like what I'm feeling or how I'm perceiving other people, they're perceiving me, has to do with like these big societal narratives and how a lot of them just aren't true. And if I really look at my life, I can see the ways in which, yes, I can be jealous of my friend whose husband's taking care of her when she has been diagnosed with breast cancer at 35. But also in that same scene, we have a conversation about how she's in these Facebook groups with women whose husbands are not like taking care of them. And like the greatest indicator of whether or not your spouse will stay by your side if you're diagnosed with cancer is whether or not you're a woman. So a lot of these women, husbands left, husbands still expect them to do all of the child rearing by themselves, all the cleaning by themselves. So a lot of times as a single person, when you're thinking about the partner you don't have, you're thinking about the best case scenario partner, not the partner who's gonna abandon you when you are on your deathbed, not the partner who's gonna ruin your finances. Like, you're not thinking about that person, but that person is also a very likely, scenario. But then also thinking about, well, is this even true? Even though my friend has this incredible husband, he couldn't do it by himself. Right. We were there for her. I'm like out walking dogs. If y'all you know me, I don't mess with dogs. I don't mess with her dog specifically. BB, you know what it is. And I'm out here walking her dog, we were delivering meals. We were all it took a community to get her to the other side. And I think about, myself, I've had hard times in my life that my friends have shown up in really major ways. So it's no, I'm not gonna die alone or whatever. So just kind of interrogating those beliefs. And for Black Joy around Valentine's Day, I wrote a couple of pieces about how you should have romanticize your friendships and romance your friends. And I interviewed this therapist, and she was telling me that she's a Black woman. She specializes in Black women. And she was yeah, I have a lot of Black women clients who are talking about the difficulties of being single, but also a lot of them are talking about the difficulties of being friendless. A lot of them don't have any friends. And I was shit, I got a ton of friends. I'm rich in friends. I've been taking these friends for granted. So, so the friendship is not a given either. So I also wanted to kind of talk about that as well, and to celebrate that, and to say they're not a runner-up prize.
Right.
Any other questions? All right. I think that ends our conversation with the lovely Minda Honey. Yay.
Y'all was supposed to be vulgar, and I don't think either one of you cursed this entire episode.
She did.
Oh, we was keeping count.
You know what? One more story about this white man. White man date. So I was going out with this white man, and we were in line at the grocery store because he burnt the food he was cooking me, and he's took me to the grocery store, took me to the freezer. I was just pick something out, and I cried. I was so upset. I was my mom doesn't even feed me frozen food. We're in the checkout line, and the cashier is are you Filipino? I was yeah, I'm Filipino. And the guy was oh yeah, I work with a lot of Filipinos. All they do is sit around cursing and telling dirty stories. And me and the cashier both looked at him, but I was also low key I've been at that function.
You've been in that function.
I've been at that function. But I'm not going to let you disparage my people's workplace behavior.
Well, I'm shocked. Before we dismiss to you all buying a book and coming and having Minda sign it, I want to say a huge thank you to Zeppelin Books for allowing us to be here.
Thank you, Zeppelin. Thank you, Alex.
Support your
Andrea.
local bookstore. This is one of the realest places to ever do it, and we are so fortunate to be here. They open up the space to us on a day that they are closed to
Yes.
fit our schedule, and we are so grateful to you for having us be here tonight. Thank you again to our producer, Preston, as always, for doing the sound. And Scotty, who was here to drop off a mic stand that we so desperately needed. So thank you to him. Thank you again, Minda. It has been truly a pleasure, and we are so grateful that you decided to come to Orlando and share this book with us. You could have been anywhere else, but you chose to be with us.
No, I
it
love
means
the
the
Vulgar
world.
We
Geniuses.
love you
Veronica,
back.
Denny, yeah, y'all are
10,000
just
back.
so joyful, so much fun. Natasha was saying, I felt like I already knew them the second
Yes,
I
girl.
showed up last night. So thank you for bringing that energy to the literary space and all that you do to support writers, particularly writers of color.
And thank y'all for showing up, because it's
Yes,
a Sunday.
Thank you for coming. You know, Sunday could be any day, but you chose to be with us and to listen to Minda. So thank you very much for coming to our event. Thank you again to Zeppelin Books. And with that, folks, have a great night.
Go buy some books, spend some money.
Books, books, books.
We hope you enjoyed our show.
Our show has been produced and edited by Preston Long. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast.
Our theme song you've been nodding your head to is by Sean Kantrowitz. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Dammit. That's SeanDammit.
Follow us on Instagram at The Vulgar Geniuses.
Bye!